Now, welcome along to the Huddle Breakdown. So we already recorded a piece looking ahead to the derby this weekend, but we thought we'd hop on again and discuss further in more detail now that we have more detail the game coming up this weekend, because I had to listen back and there was a lot of AZ stuff mixed in it. So now that we know the Celtic are officially in the Europa League and they have Rangers up this Sunday, we would come back and actually do a little bit more in-depth and a more detailed preview of the derby match this weekend. Chico James and Alan Morrison are with me as always, lads. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Good.
So it was a 2-1 defeat in the end for Celtic, but they do go through to the Europa League group stages. The group stage draw was this morning as well. Celtic have been drawn with Bayer Leverkusen, with Real Betis, and with Ferencvaros as well, a familiar foe in Ferencvaros. Hopefully Celtic will get their revenge from last year. Actually, it seems like a couple of years ago. We'll start with the AZ stuff, the defeat to the Eredivisie side, but ultimately Celtic go through. Anybody who watched our preview, James, you made a Jenga analogy. In the end, the tower did fall for Celtic, but what were your general thoughts on what happened and what we could probably take from the game?
Yeah, so the data came in late this morning, so I haven't done my thread yet. I'll do that later today, but had a kind of a preliminary look at some of it and did some quick benchmarking. And I think, the concept of the tower falling is, how bad was it? I think that's the question, because it's easy in the heat of the moment. People are manic, frantic. I've been talking about that lately. I mean, it seems like there's this manic swinging going on with people just generally and in society right now for good reason. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on, and we're kind of a manifestation of that in all of us, even within the context of football supporters. So, in the midst of the game, people going berserk right and left on Twitter. So that's why I like to kind of cool out, not go crazy too much, and then take a fresh look, try to be somewhat objective. So how bad was it? Well, some proxies relative to kind of possession around our box. I think that's a decent proxy for control of a game, threatening of a game. And the disparity in that game was kind of similar to what we saw historically when we play one or two or even three levels higher. So, for example, they had 47 entries into our box and 39 touches in our box. Those were both more than what Bayern Munich had when they beat us 3-0 in Germany in the Champions League a few years back. Those are comparable to what we've posted when we play against a KR Reykjavik or a Saduva. So their quality in the final third was lacking. And we talked about that heading into the game. They'd lost their best striker, their best attacking midfielder over the summer. But as far as kind of building back to front, having a game plan, which is what was my concern, identifying pretty clear structural issues in our tower, so to speak. And Alkmaar being a very sophisticated club in game planning for opponents, and analytically one of the top clubs in Europe, I think. They focused in on this. Again, just to give you another example, McGregor only received 26 passes. That's very low for him in any game, let alone as the single pivot against the team that's aggressively pressing us. Rokic only received 11 passes. And if you look at the effectiveness of their press, Rokic turned the ball over 7 times relative to receiving 7 passes. So that's a lot of turnover rate relative to being involved. Turnbull lost possession 14 times on 23 balls received. And let's see, Abada lost possession 12 times on 19 passes received. So, there was those transition points that I was worried about, and they had a lot of these sequences of play where they were threatening around and near our box. Fortunately, they didn't convert a ton of them, but this is again levels. So, if you look at the the number of entries and touches around our box. Again, the PSG 7-1 and the Barcelona 7-0 had lower numbers, but they had Cavani, Messi. There's levels here and disparity of levels and talent. And Alkmaar's wage budget is not a high one. I mean, it's something like maybe 60% of ours. So they're very well run, but they're not getting top-notch talent. So for what they optimize based off of the level that they have. So that was always my fear of kind of confronting them, which is, if you face an intelligent opposition that then goes up a level or two in talent, and we shouldn't make too much of Alkmaar. I mean, they're a good team, but they're not Leverkusen. They're not probably Betis. They're a notch below us at talent level overall. Where we should be is from a wage bill perspective. So it's, as I've talked about, that scaling. How does all of this fit together? How does the Jenga tower be resilient as we scale higher in quality of opposition, not only in talent, but then those that are sophisticated in deploying that talent? And I think the verdict yesterday was, less than optimal, shall we say.
Okay. Let's look at a positive aspect of this, Alan. Celtic are in the Europa League, and they got there using a defence of Ralston, Welsh, and Greg Taylor / Adam Montgomery. Adam Montgomery, certainly one of the positives from last night, came in for Greg Taylor, who was injured, and a few iffy moments. Obviously, Sugawara, who switched to the right hand side, caused a whole host of issues, especially in the first half. Obviously, he was difficult to deal with, but if you look at it, cold hard facts, and I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit here. Cold hard facts is dominated that game. They scored a goal from a Hart mistake and a Starfelt OG.
Yeah, they dominated it, but again, if you look at cold hard facts, and I've not seen the final numbers, somebody posted some probably from FOTMob last night on XG over the two ties. 3-2 is about the right outcome. So having said all the things, and I don't disagree with anything James has said, factually correct, good bit of benchmarking, and he's right. But am I worried about it? I'm not as worried as I would have been 2 years ago, because clearly Postecoglou is not an idiot, and the team that he put out yesterday, that's no surprise that you get teams being able to play to those type of numbers, because you've got two central midfielders, two eights, who really aren't athletic enough against that type of opposition to withstand a press. You've got two fullbacks that we've said, however manfully, and they are performing manfully, and however well and over and above what our expectations are in terms of how they're performing, are not going to be the fullbacks that Postecoglou wants to play the system football he wants. We've got, we've nowhere near got the centre-half combination that Postecoglou will want to end up with. And similarly, we've got a 19-year-old kid on the right who's done great. And again, he got into the box in dangerous areas 3 times in the first 10 minutes. Celtic had a great first 10 minutes, but we'll forget that because we considered that awful goal. But actually, in the first 10 minutes, it took them nearly 9 minutes before they even had a pack pass in the game, right? So there were some positives to take from it. And as I said yesterday, they chose not to play at the weekend, meaning they only had 2 games. And in both games against Celtic, they've essentially, fitness-wise, pretty much collapsed for the last quarter of the game. At Celtic Park, they didn't have a single shot after the 67th minute. And in the last quarter, yesterday, yes, of course, they were throwing things forward. But again, they were creating very, very little. And there was some desperate defending. But again, I think they'll regret not having that extra game time. And these are the sort of variables that matter at this time of the season against any opposition. And they can level up because this was a very good team. But I think they got their preparation wrong, and they've paid the consequences for it. So, but also you have to take into account how hard they've had to work to stay in that game. Yeah. So the reason that they're out on their feet in 60, 70 minutes is the amount of harassing that Celtic have done, the amount of defending they've had to do. Celtic still had 11 shots yesterday. They still carved them open in the first 10 minutes 2 or 3 times. They've had to do a lot of work to stay in that tie. So let's not forget that as well.
I counted at least 3 times in the first half where Kyogo was in Celtic's own half, harrying the defender and chasing him down. And implementing the high press, which ended up being in Celtic's own half. But that's what he was trying his best. And I think ultimately Celtic are through, and that's all that really matters. It's probably not sustainable across the season, but we're not going to face AZ or teams of that quality the whole way across the season.
Yeah, and this that's obviously the most important thing was what we got through. I mean, what as I've talked before, I try to think about things like second, third, fourth order, kind of like chess game. And this is I'm no way being critical of Postecoglou and his decision making. It's again, back to the Jenga tower. What pieces does he have to work with, and how robust and resilient are they going to be relative to how he is going to play? We know that now. He's not going to change how he plays. So, and I think a good example of that yesterday, and I mentioned this before we went live, was Alkmaar went long yesterday as a fairly, in my mind anyway, a clear tactic. And one of the concepts that we talked about over the last few weeks since Hart's arrival was the spacing issue, where Hart is not going forward that extra 10 or 15 or 20 yards like a sweeper keeper normally would. So that was the question when we signed Hart. Is he going to play like a sweeper keeper like Ange usually deploys, or is he going to stay back? What are the positives and negatives of both of those? Well, Alkmaar, in my mind, clearly identified a weakness with that, which is the space between the defensive line and where Hart is. And they were lobbing balls into that space constantly. That created basically the goal where he made the mistake. Mm-hmm. So, and what I've talked about in the past, when you get clubs that are well run, they get a book. I've talked about a book like Michelin responded to Abada in the second game. Smarter clubs that analyze these things are going to identify these weaknesses, these structural issues, because the pieces of the Jenga tower are not customized to fit together, and there's going to be vulnerabilities. And well-run teams, regardless of, and it's a sliding scale. I mean, a well-run team that has talent can obliterate those kinds of things. If you go up against a PSG and they do their homework and they really zone in and attack on you with that quality and disparity in talent, it can get ugly. Whereas, if we're dealing mostly in the domestic league, there's a lot of teams that don't do that work, quite frankly. It's pretty obvious that a lot of clubs in domestically aren't that well run analytically. And then the ones that are, for the most part, don't have the talent to really hammer us because we have such a disparity in levels. So that's, to me, what comes out of this. Yeah, is this going to matter against St. Mirren at home? No, probably not, because they don't have the talent to really make us pay. But it's an issue of on the margins, and that's so I'm not negative. I'm pointing it out. Meaning that this is going to be an inherent structural thing that we're going to deal with all season, I think. Yeah. And there will be games when we're blitzkrieging like this going forward, and there's just going to be either bad luck in balls. There's going to be mistakes like we saw yesterday, but the mistakes kind of cloaked some of that. I mean, that they had a lot of attacking threat above and beyond just those two mistakes. And that right back that they had, he got in a lot of dangerous areas, but his decision making was not great. Right. So if you have a better decision maker in that role, he was trying to volley balls where he had room to take down, and inside our penalty area, there was a lot of sequences of play there where a little bit better decision making, a little bit more composure. And if they had a better striker, that was the other thing. I mean, their striker wasn't terribly great in either game. So that's. I think
so, James. I'm not even disagreeing with what you're saying.
I know.
I agree with everything. I guess where I'm trying to come from is really perspective in terms of, if you think back to where we were before the season started, and if someone had said to us, come the end of August, you'll have European parity with the Rangers, as in you'll both be in the Europa League. They won't be in the Champions League, and we're actually in Europe at all, because we didn't think they would be, right? Mm-hmm. Then I'm kind of I think we're kind of about 2 under at the turn, frankly. In terms of to use a golf analogy, we all like our analogies, right? So I think we're doing pretty well now. Now, everything you say is however right, but is our season going to crumble or even be defined if we lose 5-0 in Leverkusen? It isn't.
No, I agree.
Yeah, or in Betis, and we may well do so because the risks that you identify are absolutely spot on. But I guess if we had a settled team and a squad that had been built and a manager that had got his ideas over, and we're losing 5-0 in Leverkusen, I would be pretty pissed. But I'm, to me, it's almost like a free hit, that group, and actually the next 2-3 windows are all about doing as well as we can domestically, trying to win that league, which we can. We already have seen. We're going to absolutely murder a lot of the teams in the SPFL, and doing enough to get by the better teams. Whilst in Europe, against the really good sides, anything's a bonus.
Well, it is sort of a free hit in a way as well, because third place in the Europa League groups dropped down into the Conference League. So I fancy Celtic to beat Ferencváros, to be honest, get 3 points on the board and finish third in the group. I fancy them to finish third in the group and go down to the conference, and at least that's European football after Christmas as well. If they don't go on to beat, obviously you're aiming to top the group. Second in the group in the Europa League this year play against the third teams that are dropping down from the Champions League. So again, it's a difficult way that UEFA have set this up. It's becoming even more difficult to get any further in the Champions League. So it's first place is the place you want to be, but I don't know if that's a realistic option for Celtic at the minute. But let's move on to the derby match this weekend, because obviously this is the real benchmark for me. This is the real measurement of where Celtic are at, is the one team in the league they're competing with for the league. And obviously there's a lot being made about the Rangers COVID cases during the week. I don't want to go and delve into it too far, because we actually don't know who's going to be missing from this game. It could be 5 players, it could be 2 players, it could be 0 players. We don't know who from the first team in Rangers are going to be ultimately out for this game. So we won't really touch on that, assuming that everyone's fit and everyone's ready to go and Celtic are playing against a full strength Rangers side. James, where can Celtic do damage to Rangers?
Yeah, I think it's ironically it's in transition. So this comes back to kind of how the styles match up and the way the game plays out. So I always try to think as an opposition analyst for both teams when I kind of preview these games. So if I'm someone who's on the Celtic side of the equation, I got that hat on and I'm looking at their vulnerabilities. I see lack of pace in their center backs. I see a 36-year-old midfielder who's lost a couple of steps. I see the things that Alan talks about all the time, which is rightfully so. They're relatively narrow setup. So when they're at their most vulnerable is when transitions do happen, where Davis has had issues now in Europe the last couple of seasons because he's slowing, and those 2 center backs have issues because of their lack of pace. So that's where I see the transition, the big issues for them. I think they have a way of addressing that, and that's if they just play off us. I mean, if they play back deeper, and kind of absorb our pressure, because that if I were them, that's what I would do, because then that creates and highlights the risks that we have in transition, and it kind of reduces their vulnerabilities. Now the flip side of that is, what's the risk reward on the high press, and that I think that's the most hopeful scenario for us, is if they decide to go gung ho high press, and there's a bigger risk reward there. I mean, that could turn out bad for us, as we saw yesterday, depending on how we play out. But I think it would stretch them and create more vulnerability in those transitions. So that scenarios where I could see a 4-4, 5-4, like a crazy kind of back and forth, hectic, helter skelter game. Whereas if they decide to play kind of back, and look to absorb pressure and hit us on the counter, I suspect, probably a better risk reward from their perspective. and more challenges for us is my guess.
Yeah, there's maybe I'm just old school. Maybe I'm just a little bit to have been raised too much in Irish football. But I do obviously see the benefit of playing the ball out from the back and continuing and sticking to your game plan. But I would like to see a little bit more fluidity with Celtic in terms of decision making, where the high press, like happened against AZ, leaves space somewhere. Where's that space? It's in their defense. Kick it long once or twice. You might catch them out, especially with Kyogo's pace. I think Celtic can catch Rangers out here at the weekend, especially over the right back situation, whether it's Patterson or Tavernier, especially if it's Patterson. If he's getting forward, the space is going to be there for Christie or Edouard, whoever it is that plays on that left-hand side. There's going to be room somewhere. You just need to expose it. So Alan, this is as confident as I've been in a year going into a Rangers game. Is that misplaced, or do you think genuinely we're parity with them at this point?
Well, we'll see. I honestly do not know what is going to happen on Sunday. I really don't, because...
And that's the end of the Huddle Breakdown show. Thank you.
So, yeah, there you go. That's it. That's my analysis. No, seriously. So I've written an article on this that'll pop up tomorrow, explaining that the games that can look back over the last 2 seasons and all of the fixtures, and what the picture that gives you is, not surprisingly, that actually there's really very little between the sides. And this was, again, I keep saying it, but it is probably the worst of Celtic and probably the best of them in terms of how well they're being organised, how well the team's been constructed, how tactically consistent they are, and how effective they are implementing their game plan versus the absolute chaos that we saw, from Celtic. But despite all of those things, and despite all of the off-the-field variance and on-the-field variance that we saw last season, there was broadly a parity between the teams. What really was the difference was that, for example, Rangers were more effective at set pieces, but slightly. Although they didn't have quite as much possession and didn't have quite as many even passes during a game, they were a little bit better at breaking lines than we were. These are tiny margins, by the way. Guess what? They made less defensive errors than we did. So those small things have all kind of helped them to get a much better record over Celtic than in the last 2 seasons. But as I say, I think the difference, I think, as James has mentioned previously, Celtic probably weren't as far ahead of the Rangers in the 1920 season as the league table suggests, and vice versa. Any sort of equality of variance and any sort of semblance of tactical structure at Celtic would have meant that there would be nowhere near a 25-point gap. So that all being said, I think they've still got the same management team. They've kept all their players, and they're going to play exactly the same way. So that aspect of it is relatively predictable. Albeit, as James has mentioned, do they press high? They tend to sit in and press from the halfway. When they play Celtic, I think they'll probably do the same thing. Their weaknesses are well known to us. There isn't a great deal of pace throughout the team, actually, but there is more athleticism, there is more physicality than what Celtic have got. They're probably better organised, especially attacking set pieces, and they've got a very well drilled, well rehearsed, well understood way of playing, which is a strength. But they do give you space on the wings. The Davis and McGregor aging is a real issue for them. A number of their players don't seem to be in good form. If we can isolate a winger against Tavernier, we know Tavernier's fantastic going forward, amazing delivery into the box, but he's a bit like Nir Bitton when it comes to defensive performance, and that he doesn't sense danger. And we know with Kyogo, if you don't know where he is, you're already dead, right? So, that's going to be an interesting one. So I just think for them, this is a hugely unpredictable game, and I'll be very interested to see if they change the way they play because of that. Whereas for Celtic, it's going to be fairly predictable in terms of what the opposition are going to do, but Postecoglou probably won't change the way he plays because of that. But what I would say is, for me, what would I do? I would actually play Edouard, because I think, to your point, we need to have that longer option. But also that would push Kyogo left onto Tavernier, which I think would be a really good thing to do. And I'd move Christie in instead of Rogic, because we have to try and match the athleticism in central midfield to take advantage of Davis, but also just to match up Kamara and Aribo, who are very athletic, keep the ball moving, very neat and tight.
I think it was Beans from the Fitzbean podcast that said that Rogic sprinting looks like that run you do when you're crossing the road, but the car is coming quicker than you expected. Rogic's running back or attempt to defend in the first half was just laughable at times. He just doesn't have the legs for it.
It's not just that.
Mobile enough for that.
If you look at Enda, if not just that, but if you look at even the game last night, he's kind of pressing from the front, so he's not got great recovery pace anyway. So you've got a huge hole behind him in that midfield. And Turnbull's a little bit guilty of that as well, but I think Turnbull's a little bit more athletic. But to have the two of them together against a team who are very strong in that middle area, and this is where I think if Celtic do perhaps invert their fullbacks, they didn't do it a lot last night, but if they do against the Rangers, they'll get that. They could get that overload in central midfield. As I say, they could then isolate the two fullbacks against Kyogo and Abada, which I think would be a good thing for Celtic.
Yeah, so, the way, yeah. Again, so going back to my analogy, so I think that the fit of the pieces in the tower are better than last season, meaning that we have a better architect, we have a better manager. I think the quality of the pieces. I think that's a big question because of the transfer window, and particularly in Raven. Particularly in defense, and that's in my mind the real question here is we're going to get more out of who we have. It's how they are going to fit and the quality of them, and can Ange coach them up within the context of the system, knowing that some of them, because they're not ideal fits, they're not optimized fits. There are these structural weaknesses, and I think he's going to do a good job in minimizing and kind of addressing them. But they're there, and that means that they can be targeted. And as Alan's point, I mean, I'm increasingly, I'm not convinced, but I think the likelihood that they end up going 4-4-2 with a diamond midfield in attack anyway, after yesterday, I think is pretty decent. And meaning that if I think about if I were them, putting Morelos and Roof kind of man-to-man on our center backs with Kent, or let's say even Rebo in that 10, head-to-head against McGregor, I think from their perspective, that's a favorable athletic matchup. And that still leaves them with that narrowness. I think the vulnerabilities there become kind of the right center back. Right midfielder. I mean, if it's Lundstrom or Arfield, they got to shuttle out to the side there. Yeah. But again, is Taylor going to play? Is that going to be Montgomery now as our left back? So that's the fun part. I said earlier in the week. I mean, to me, this is a tremendous game because of all this kind of intrigue and. The fact that we don't really know, it's kind of a blank canvas as far as how these things are going to match up.
Yeah. So very quickly then, before we finish up, I know you said that this could go either way, Alan, but I'll get a quick prediction from you regardless.
So I've just been checking.
Give me a score. Just give me whether Celtic.
Yeah. So the ELO rating site do a match odds calculation based on I don't know what factors they base it on, frankly. Yesterday, for example, they said that Celtic only had a 30% chance of winning the match, but a 76% chance of winning the tie, and that seemed like pretty accurate. In terms of this game, they've got the Rangers at 51% to win the game, so that means that Celtic have got a 50% chance of either losing or drawing, right? So that doesn't seem that great. So I think a draw would be quite a good result, because as I say, I'm not going to. based on where we are in the season, they're going to be full. That's a fair comment, by the way. They're going to be full strength tomorrow. Don't even worry about that. They'll be at one way or another. They'll be full strength. I'm sure they'll play a lot better than they have been. I mean, the team they played, the Armenian team, were awful. They were awful against Enda United. They were awful in 2 games against Malmo. But I'm sure they'll be on their game tomorrow. So I think if Celtic can get a draw, that'll be a fantastic result at this stage in the season, given all of the Jenga architectural issues that we have.
James, is it going to survive or is it going to fall over?
Yeah, I would say on the margin, I'm less optimistic than I was going into yesterday. So I'm kind of where Alan is. We can absolutely win the game. We can actually win the game comfortably, scoreline wise. But I think we're going to need some positive luck if that were to happen, is my guess. More so, I think it's likely to be a really close game. And I'm a little more worried about losing than I was before yesterday.
Yeah. Well, as I said on the original preview pod, Nir Beaton is guaranteed not to get sent off in this game. So that's one thing that you can take.
I don't know about that. We'll see. You never know.
Jesus, if Nir Beaton starts to center back, I genuinely might just jump out the window. I think
you know what's funny, Enda? Given the manic, I'm not kidding you. I usually stay off of Twitter during actual live play, the actual game playing. Once in a while, I'll check in at halftime. I checked in at halftime yesterday, and following the Starfelt error, I saw people calling for Beaton to start on Sunday. So that tells you how manic some people are right now.
Celtic Twitter during games, though, it reminds me of the Simpsons scene where the PTA is disbanded and the guy runs out, "Oh no, the PTA is disbanded," and he jumps out the window, and then Principal Seymour is like, "No, it hasn't disbanded," and he comes back in the window. That's what Celtic Twitter is like during games. But I think Celtic have the best opportunity that they've had in a year to win at Rangers. So that's how confident I am. That doesn't say I'm very confident. That just says I'm more confident than I was last season. Hopefully they will get a win. A draw is not the end of the world, especially given the stage of the season we're at anyway. But enjoy the game. Hopefully by this time next week, we'll be talking about a Celtic win in the derby and the Celtic getting into the Europa League, and everything will be rosy on Ange Postecoglou's birthday. Happy birthday, Ange Postecoglou from the Huddle Breakdown as well. I know you listen to the show, so happy birthday to you. James, Alan, enjoy the game at the weekend. Thanks for joining me today.
Take care.
Thanks, guys. And a special shout out to anyone on the West Coast in the U.S. because that's a 5 a.m. start time on Sunday. So I know there's CSCs out in the West Coast and in up in Canada, Vancouver and stuff. So
get
the coffee ready.
Is the game plan to stay up and watch it at 5 a.m. or is the game plan to fall asleep and then get up at 5 a.m.?
It depends. I don't live on the West Coast. My plan is I get up at about 5:30 and get the coffee going. So.
No, you gotta. I would stay up the whole night. Well, that just it shows the stages of our development we're at. James. Anyway.
It shows you're a lot younger than us, to be fair.
Exactly.
That was a nicer way. That was my way of saying I'm a lot younger than you, James. Anyway, that is the Huddle Breakdown. If you want to follow us on Twitter, we're at Huddle Breakdown or the Breakdown Inc. as well. If you want to subscribe to the YouTube channel, and on Twitter, we're at the Breakdown Inc. We've got loads of fresh stuff coming your way over the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned to that, and hopefully we get a win this weekend. Thanks for watching, folks. Good luck.